Hey nerds, we are going to review and break down the latest episode of Star Wars The Acolyte, which is the final episode, starting now. Welcome to the Nerd Social. I am Colin.
And I'm David.
So we have now gotten to the final episode of Star Wars The Acolyte. This is the 8th episode of this season. Hopefully it's just season 1, but maybe there's a season 2. And the spoiler-free logline of this episode is Confrontation and Revelation Await. Short one again, just like last week's episode. David, what are your thoughts on this last episode of Star Wars The Acolyte?
This makes up for the past 2 episodes, which were letdowns. And I love the action, I love the interaction, and then it answers a bunch of questions. And how they ended is what I don't like, even though there were some parts that made sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree to a certain degree. I think that there are some great things that has happened, that they've experimented, they've done some novel things. I really like that. I think that having episode 7 where it was not very good for the whole story arc, I think it should have been much earlier. And the conclusion of it, they did some great action scenes, some good revelations. There's also some good setup for potentially a season 2. And I think have all those components really help to stick the landing to a point where, okay, I want more of this. But getting there was definitely an issue. And hopefully Disney is able to clear those things up because, like I said before in previous reviews, they really have not done a good job of putting together episodes. And if you just compare it to other shows that are out there in streaming, it's just not as good in terms of the quality. I think that the storytelling's pretty good. I think that the writing is okay, but the story structure is just not that good. And hopefully they're able to fix that with subsequent Disney Plus shows, not just Star Wars, Marvel as well, and other types of properties that they put out, because I think it's a huge problem and they should address it as soon as they can. Having said all that, David, what would you give your rating for this episode, but also the Acolyte series overall?
This episode, I gave it a 7.
Okay.
Because it has very good action and answers a lot of questions. And a couple of cameos, which we will share later, which help make the show more connected to the original series. And the whole season itself, I gave it a 7 as well. Because the majority of it is very good, because the action, the characters, but the show is poorly disorganized. Like, for example, episode 7, where they reveal the entire truth of what happened in Brendok. Should have been a mid-season finale, and then and episode 6 will be enough to become like a setup to the season finale.
Right.
I feel like the show was rushed
Mm-hmm.
because this was hyped up, especially with Carrie-Anne Moss and the actor from Squid Games. And even though they did enough to give it a sense of the character and their background, they hype it so much, but it led to a lot of disappointments. And Dara died early in the show. And the way Soul was portrayed as a very strong and powerful Jedi, but he's very fragile and frail and flawed.
Okay. Yeah, for this episode, I would give it an 8, which is a road trip. I think that the action scenes really seal it for me. I think that the revelations in this show really seal it for me as well. I did predict that one of the characters was going to turn. So, fairly interesting that came about. And then overall, I would say this is also a 7 dinner party, because I do have the same frustrations as you do, David. And also, I think overall, Star Wars on Disney Plus has been average to above average, like I've said in previous reviews. This is no different. Hopefully they'll change, but maybe they won't. Who knows? Any other thoughts before we get into spoiler territory?
Let's dive in.
Okay. So, if you like what we have to say with Star Wars The Acolyte, with this episode and also previous episodes, and also all of our other content, please share, subscribe for more of this. We really appreciate your support, and we are also growing as a channel. Spoilers ahead. This is where episode 6 left off when she had her helmet on. And then there's a more extended scene here in the very beginning where she able to sense the future, where May is actually the one that's killing Soul. And Khmer also had the dark eyes. Seems as though he was hypnotized. Some people online speculate that Plagueis had something to do with it. I am not sure about that, but David, what are your thoughts about what happened with the jostling of the helmet with Osha and then Khmer trying to stop that from happening?
We get to understand more why some Siths are wearing helmets. Well, while some, like Darth Maul, for example, don't wear helmets. This in particular shows Khmer focus certain abilities to connect to the Force. And so Osha probably learned that she has the ability to sense the future, just like Anakin Skywalker did. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, it's a vision, not a premonition. We'll find out that the future is changed. Mm-hmm. The next scene, we saw the actual live action, first time Darth Plagueis, which is almost exactly from the books how he was described. For all our viewers don't know, Darth Plagueis was the master of Darth Sidious, and it was mentioned in episode 3 to Anakin, where Palpatine talked about the story of Darth Plagueis to Anakin Skywalker. So,
yeah, and I think that one other thing, Khmer really reminds me of Kylo Ren, and with that type of interaction, that type of suave, that type of charisma that's on screen, I think that's definitely a very good parallel to his journey that's going on and why he's not really Sith yet. Hopefully, with the season 2, we get to dive deeper into his dissension into the dark side. In this side, we see that May is captured and gets up and escapes back to Brendok. And again, we unfortunately don't get to see May as much, and I think that May gets lost here in this episode because there's a lot of reclaiming who she is, but then her memory gets wiped by Khmer and Osha because they didn't want the Jedi to interrogate her, basically find out where they are. So we don't really know what's going to happen with her in the future, and whether or not she's able to reclaim the memory, whether or not she's able to reunite with Osha, we don't really know. And do you think that it was necessary to have her mind wiped? Maybe it is because she's going to get interrogated by the Jedi, but there's really nothing there left for May to do. And I think it just kind of bridged the character in a lot of ways.
I mean, I was planning to save this for the next scene coming up, though, because we're going to see the interaction with Khmer and Osha bidding farewell to each other before the mind wipe. But because you're right, May's purpose is now done, especially that Khmer realized Osha is the one she's looking for. Right. Because they gave her the final test. In order to become an acolyte of the Sith, you must kill a Jedi without weapons. Because May killed Darth with a dagger. She killed the Torben with a poison. Both of them are weapons. Mm-hmm. So the whole time, it was the Force. Right. That was the answer to the riddle. But then at the end, Khmer realized that Osha is the one he's looking for, because she's much more connected to the Force. So followed May back to Brendok. He confronted Khmer and realized that in order to save Osha, he has to take out Khmer. But his emotions are catching up to him, as well as his guilt. He wants to confess to the High Council. He explained to both May and Osha that they're not actually twins, they're actually the same person, because they were created by a virgin, and he feared that virgin is a disturbance to the Force. But the thing is that it's not. This scene here, when Osha got so angry, now she finds out the truth that Soul killed her mother. Mm-hmm. She's doing a forced choke on Soul. Mm-hmm. Soul knows he's gonna die. He accepted it because he knows his crimes. He knows he deserved this, and that's why he said to Osha, "It's okay." And then,
do you think that he should have died?
I don't think so. Is he deserved to be written to be dead? No, because there should be a moment where he's barely alive, just to say more words. But unfortunately, he's very dead. because that's the whole point of this title, the Acolyte. We get to see through the eyes of the Sith, which is Osha herself.
And Osha becomes the new Acolyte. We'll talk about that later on when we get there. And there's some controversy with this scene online about the lightsaber changing from blue to red. But again, something novel, something cool. And people saying, why wasn't Anakin's lightsaber changed? They all are on different journeys. And I think that people get frustrated with consistency. And I think it's a very valid point, but I think that there needs to be some sort of license that comes about where new ideas can be explored. Same thing when episode 9, I think that people pan episode 9 because Rey used certain type of force powers to heal. And people were like, what's going on? That's not a thing. And I think that it's okay to explore all different aspects of the force, but I get why people can get upset with consistency's sake. So I'm still leaning more toward novel ideas and trying to experiment in some ways. Some things will be good, some things will be bad. And I think that people lose sight of that fact because they are so invested in either the originals or the prequels or even to some extent the sequels. They just romanticize it. And I think that the romanticization then leads to rigidness, to the idea of, okay, this didn't happen in this movie, this didn't happen in this movie, then why should it happen in this show? So I do get the fan reaction, but I also believe that they should try to be more open to it. And,
exactly.
And not to say that everything worked. Not everything worked for me because Indara dying early didn't work for me. You know,
yeah.
Vanestra being a very shady character worked for me. Soul dying in this case worked for me. And I think that May being a part of this kind of worked in the beginning, but again, it just leaves her to be a very insignificant character at the end. So, Kamir, should he be here? Should he not be here? He's the Whisperer. Yeah, why not? And he had a very thirsty moment anyway, so why not? So there are some things that are good, some things that are bad, and I think that we should really recognize all that as in its whole.
And we also have to point out that Osha and May are not human. They were created by the Force. Right. So that's probably one theory of how she able to change the blue lightsaber to red. Because the viewers should keep in mind that Saul pointed out that both Osha and May are not really a being. They're actually created by the Force itself.
Right.
So that's a theory of how she able to change the lightsaber from blue to red. Yeah. Everyone's so religious to the fact that the Force belong to both Sith and Jedi. Mm-hmm. But it turns out it's more than that.
Yeah, and I get that because even in some of the Clone Wars cartoons, they explore that the Force does not belong to the light or the dark. And I mentioned in one of the previous reviews about The Last Jedi, Luke Skywalker saying the Force does not belong to either Jedi or Sith. I think that's already licensed there to explore all aspects of the Force. And I think that the mothers being a part of it, great, awesome. But of course, I know that there's a lot of controversy about that, which I think is invalid because it's a lot of toxicity that's involved with that aspect of it. But at the same time, people are exploring, and it's fun. And like I said, you don't like it, you don't have to watch it. And Disney will adjust because they'll look at the ratings and then figure out, okay, do we need to pivot or do we not? So it all depends on the numbers. And again, this is a money-making enterprise. So if they see that it's not making any money, they will pull back. So it's always going to be like that. Speaking of Vanestra here is speaking to one of the senators, and the senator is trying to figure out what the heck is happening. Vanestra is being coy about it, knowing that Soul is back on Brendok and trying to investigate what the heck's going on. She had a sense that it might be Kamir, her former Padawan, and there's, again, some shady stuff that's happening with her. And then her storyline is actually not over in this episode and in this season. So it'll be interesting to see what will happen with her in the future. And how deep is she going to cover things up for the Jedi, which will be very interesting to watch. And this is the explanation to the Chancellor of the Senate at the time, and he's explaining, oh, if Soul is the main perpetrator, then case closed, move on. Basically, that's what happened here. David, what do you think of Soul being the scapegoat of this whole incident, of this whole series?
It's a gray area because they doesn't want to make the Jedi look bad. While at the same time, he caused this whole mess himself. From the very beginning. He was ordered not to interfere. He did. And then it got worse when he got involved again to find Osha and May and then expose the truth that shows how flawed the Jedi are, which made the entire intergalactic republic on their toes and freaking out. It's like concerned where they should trust the Jedi as their guardians or not. And then that's when Vanessa basically white lie the whole thing and using Soul as a scapegoat. This makes sense to using him as a scapegoat because he did cause this whole mess in the first place.
Okay.
And in the very beginning of a few episodes that Vanessa has told Soul, why didn't you tell me? And Soul didn't. Vanessa, after she talked to the Senate, she had a conversation with May alone about what happened. And that's when she learned that her mind is white. And then she wants to right this wrong caused by Soul by helping her find her sister. Well, at the same time, she asked May for her help to find, and I quote, to find someone, a student of mine that turned dark, which is Khmer. And then there was a scene where after Osha killed Saul, Osha and May had a conversation that they realized everything they had was totally wrong their whole life ever since the accident. Like May apologized, I shouldn't have started that fire. And Osha says, I should have listened. So basically, they've realized they're both at fault.
Right.
That they shouldn't blame each other at all. But one thing that May realized is that the whole time she should let Osha go and make her decision herself. Hence, that May asked Osha, what do you want? And Osha made a deal that she still wants to be part a Sith as Khmer. When I'm surprised of Khmer, I thought that he's going to kill May. Because Sith don't grant any kind of mercy.
Part of it is that Osha made the deal to spare her. And also, I think that part of it is Osha wanted to seek out May in the future. And we saw that interaction there. And that's why Kabir, being a little bit more compassionate, did not want to kill May. So from that point on, I will be your apprentice if you spare her. And that was the deal. And from there, this leads to this scene where it's pretty much the Darth Vader, Emperor Palpatine scene at the end of episode 3, which I really like that scene. And this is a parallel scene to it. And I think that there's definitely something there in the future to see what's going to happen with these two. What type of time jump they're going to have, what type of devastation they're going to have, or are they just going to keep quiet throughout and just be disrupting the Jedi or manipulating the Jedi to a point where they have to cover things up and not let the wider galaxy know the existence of these two. So we'll see what happens if there is going to be a season 2. And finally, at the very end of this episode, a cameo from Yoda as Vanessa comes in to say that we have an issue. So my only question to you, David, is it too late to have Yoda in here, or do you think it's the perfect timing to have Yoda at the very end?
No, it's a perfect timing because the whole show is trying to show what the Jedi were like in the High Republic. They were flourishing, they had a lot of them, but now they're at a point that it's starting to crumble. We discovered where the flaws come from. I think that's what Vanessa came to Yoda about, because Saul caused this problem, and she's concerned that there would be other Jedis or younglings that would become as flawed as Saul, and discussed about her former student Khmer and the rise of the Sith. So this is just a good timing.
Okay. And just a couple of more questions. Do you think that there is going to be a season 2, or do you think they're just going to leave it as is for the story?
I don't like it when shows that I like and they canceled and do not give a proper send off. But in this case, though, there'll be some shows that they left it open-ended, which led to somewhere that's familiar at the ending. For example, Andor, we know the story leads to Rogue One, which leads to Star Wars Episode 4, New Hope. But for this show, they left so many questions open now. I have 5 questions. One, now that Dark Plague is revealed, what's going to happen next?
Mm-hmm.
Number two, now that Yoda is shown, what's his role gonna be like?
Mm-hmm.
Three, what are they gonna do with May? Is train May as a Jedi?
Mm-hmm. Flip the roles, basically.
Because she did have some training. We don't know what's gonna happen. Four, what's gonna happen with Osha herself? Now she became Sith, a full Sith.
Mm-hmm.
And number five, are we gonna introduce a time jump, which would later meet possibly a young version of Palpatine?
Mm-hmm.
In order to connect the story between Acolyte and Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Not completely, but enough to give the idea what we know what's going to happen next.
Right. Yeah, so to answer your questions, I think for Palpatine, they're probably going to be shown at the very end. Maybe a young Palpatine, probably in his 20s or 30s, being under the tutelage of Plagueis. I think that there's going to be some type of resolution between Khmer and Osha and May, where their existence is going to be wiped out by the Jedi, because we've seen that the Jedi have had some morally questionable actions, and I get to see that there's going to be more of that later on, and that they are not infallible. So that probably will happen in season 2, possibly, maybe into a season 3. We know that Andor is only going to be 2 seasons, so it might be just 2 seasons. So they may be able to fit 8 episodes in here, where at the very end you'll see Palpatine, so they can tie somewhat into episode 1. And they're just going to try to see the decline of the peak of the Jedi, because High Republic is where the Jedi was at its strongest, and so you can only go down from here. And then what type of compromises or actions that they use that were morally questionable or politically dangerous that might lead them to a society where it's peaceful but authoritarian. That was the story of the prequels and of the Clone Wars, of the shadow we figure that comes up and takes power when the Republic is at the most unstable. So we will probably see the beginnings of the Jedi being vulnerable to corruption, to different type of ideas. And we saw it in the prequels. We start to see the cracks of the Jedi. And then Soul is the representation of all these cracks that are going on. So that's how I map out potential seasons later on. Any other thoughts before we wrap up?
No.
Okay. So if you like our review of Star Wars The Acolyte Episode 8, please comment down below. Like, share, subscribe for more content like this. And we will see you in the next video. All right. Take care, everybody.